Hello and welcome back to some more reveals for Into the Emerald Dream. We're finally up to the class cards, so today we're going to deal with Druid and Warrior. Just as a reminder, we have seen one card from Druid, it was Symbiosis, which was discover a choose one card from another class. So far we've seen 4 of the choose one cards from the other classes. This is Grace of the Great Wolf, Lightmender, Ominous Nightmares, and Barbed Thorn. So we can't fully elucidate this card anyway until we see the full choose one sets, but we can at least, see where it's trying to fit into the entire package. Also worth noting that Fandral is coming back into the core set again, so choose one cards get a buff if you can fit Fandral into that deck. Anyway, let's start with the most important thing. Druid is one of the imbue classes, so we need to see what their imbue button is. And it is Blessing of the Golem. It's going to be a 2-mana hero power, summon a 1/1 plant golem. And every time you imbue from then onwards, the bold numbers get bigger. So it'll become a 2/2, then a 3/3, 4/4, so on and so forth. It's actually extremely similar to like the Jade Druid archetype, which is like one of the classic Druid decks I think of all time, where you played a bunch of cards that said summon a Jade Golem on it, and they would start up as 1/1s, then eventually, they'll go to 2/2s, 3/3s, 4/4s, as you played more and more of the Jade Golem cards. Rather than playing Jade Golem cards like that, instead you play cards with imbue on it, and your button will get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're spending 2 mana to get a big boy, so in some regards, it's a little bit of a slower version of the Jade Golem, potentially, without the ability to like refresh your hero power, because you're limited to pushing 1 button per turn. And so far we've not seen any way for Druids to refresh the button. Note, the one card in Druid that did let you refresh the button is just rotating out right now, so you won't be able to use them together in Standard. But anyway, we also need to see some of the imbue cards, right? We've seen the neutral ones, we've seen Bitterbloom Knight, Flutterwing Guardian, and then the payoff for this as well from neutral land, Resplendent Dreamweaver. But what is the class-specific imbue? Well, it was actually something completely from left field for me. I did not expect a card like this. It is the legendary minion Hamel Rune Totem. 5 mana 5/6 minion. Start of game. If each spell in your deck is nature, imbue your hero power. Repeat this every 2 spells you cast. Wow, this is a extremely interesting card. Like, it's a very transformative effect. Whenever you get a start of game effect, it's obviously going to change like dramatically the way that your class plays. But this one is changing your button because it imbues you immediately, assuming every spell in your deck is nature. Which, if you don't have that, this is a 5 on a 5/6, which is not great, honestly, if you ask me. But it turns your gain 1 attack 1 arm button into summon a 1/1 plant golem, which is basically the paladin button, right? If you're to compare the two, they kind of match up not too dissimilarly without any minion-based synergy, but it's not a bad button, right? The paladin button, not terrible, so I think it's not a bad deal. But the really interesting part is you are rewarded for casting many spells. I'm going to highlight it later. They don't have to be nature spells on the repeat for every 2 spells you cast. As long as your deck started as only nature, if you generate spells from other classes, Hamel doesn't care. He's not a judge on that. So if you generate an arcane spell, it counts as one of your 2 spells. Which is fantastic, because there are a few cards in Druid which are spells that generate more spells, a lot of cheap spells as well in Druid, so you could easily see a world where you cast a bunch of spells in Druid, and you just steadily ramp this button up to insane proportions. For example, Symbiosis. Discover a choose 1 card from another class is a 1-mana spell, it's a nature spell as well, so you could put it into your deck. You generate a choose 1 card and discover one ideally that is a spell. Your spell has generated a spell, and maybe that spell is also cheap. You play it as well. Hey ho, my button now is summoning 2/2s instead. It's also worth noting, I talk about sometimes like the value of a card. It's harder to evaluate that on the button, because the button is a reusable asset. So obviously spending 2 mana for a 1/1 isn't a great deal, but if you have nothing better to spend your mana on, it's not the end of the world to get a button press, because you're not using a card, you're not burning a resource like that. You can use it once per turn, but it's like an infinite type of resource. So I think it doesn't take too long for this button to become seriously scary. I think at the point where you're spending 2 mana to summon 3/3s every turn, that's actually pretty frightening for a lot of decks. It's backbreaking for many decks, so yeah, if you have some sort of support for a bunch of cheap spells, this card I could see working. Obviously as well, Druid has stuff like Innovate, 0 mana nature spell, fantastic for the Hamel deck. you innovate into your symbiosis or something like that, immediately you've imbued your button. Beyond the first imbue, you're summoning a 2/2, and you could potentially, if again you get maybe some more innovate something, you may even be able to push your button early and summon like a very early 2/2 on turn 1. That's maybe not the worst thing to get your engine going. This also explains maybe like cards like the Daydreaming Pixie, where you can generate even more and more spells over time to just fuel your Hamel Rune Totem. But again, it doesn't have to be a nature spell to get the repeated effect, so maybe it doesn't explain why this card exists. Now, there are things you have to be careful for, because there are a lot of good Druid spells that aren't nature spells. New Heights, for example, is not a nature spell, so you could not put it into your Hamel Rune Totem deck. Again, assuming that you want to get the imbue effect, which you want to, because otherwise it's a 5 mana 5/6. Similarly, Swipe, which is used as like the Druid control option for the early game, ain't nature spell, so you can't use it. And Malfurion's Gift, which has basically Swipe and a ramp card in it, also isn't a nature spell, so you are losing out on a lot of potentially powerful cards. So we need some more nature spells, right? So obviously they've included some nature spells in the package. And actually, spoilers, a lot of this Druid package seems to be purely revolving around the Hamel deck. We have Horn of Plenty, 2 mana, nature spell in Druid. Discover a nature spell, it costs 2 less. Extraordinarily similar to Nature Studies, which was a 1 mana nature spell that discovered a spell, not a nature spell, but just a spell full stop. Your next one costs 1 less. Nature Studies actually saw some play, partially because it was a fuel for another engine that rewarded you for casting nature spells, which was Topia. And Topia was really strong, and actually it's somewhat similar to the imbuing type effect, in a sense that Topia, every time you cast a nature spell, you'd get a 3/3 whelp with Rush. Every time you're casting spells as the imbued Druid, your button is getting stronger and stronger, and you'll get to a point eventually where you're getting, for your button press, a bigger stat minion than the whelp with Rush you would get from Topia. I do actually just generally, hand-waving things around. I actually think Topia is better than the imbue deck, because Topia you get everything like quick and upfront, and it's a rest of game effect once you played it. But it does require on Topia to, play the card. It might be on the bottom of your deck, but at the time, Dredge was a thing, so, you could actually kind of find it a lot of times. Whereas this case, with the imbue, it's a start the game effect, so you immediately get going with that. So there are some trade-offs between Topia and the imbue deck, but I think they're actually quite a similar comparison in the fact that you might put some weaker cards in your deck just to get the engine being fueled. So because Nature Studies saw play in the Topia deck, I think Horn of Plenty will see play in this Druid imbue deck. I will say Nature Studies, I think, is better than the Horn of Plenty, probably, just because it's easy to weave in Nature Studies into your deck. And also, for the imbue deck, you don't actually care that you're generating a nature spell, so it's actually somewhat limiting. I do appreciate you're a Druid, so most of your spells are nature, but it'd be nice to be able to find some other cards. I think it's been very, very intentionally done to try and avoid Druids finding just, the ramp cards and stuff they couldn't include in the deck to begin with. Make them actually have a weakness. We also have Photosynthesis, 3 mana nature spell in Druid. Get used to that, by the way. Restore 6 health, get 3 random Druid spells. Called Kabbalist Tome, it's crying. It's basically Kabbalist Tome combined with Twilight Torrent for 3 mana. Kabbalist Tome was 4 mana arcane mage spell that gave you 3 random mage spells. Used to be 5 mana, by the way, and saw no play. Got changed to 4 mana and saw no play. Twilight Torrent saw basically no play as well, which was 2 mana to restore 6 health. I would say, I think restoring 6 health is about a 1 mana-ish effect. You combine them together in a 3 mana card! Kind of good. It obviously depends on the quality of Druid spells, but I went through the Druid spells, and actually, generally speaking, they look pretty solid if you ask me. And 3 mana getting 3 cards, not too bad, honestly. I think that's a pretty reasonable deal. I'd also say, I think at the point where you'd see Kabbalist Tome maybe seeing some play, it would also have to be about a 3 mana card. So, irrespective of all of this, you're still combining, a 3 mana-ish effect on a 1 mana effect into 1 card. So I think Photosynthesis is actually statted pretty aggressively. Now, I've went through all of this, and 19 of the 35 spells in Druid are nature. Now, you might be asking, why you mention this, because Hamel, as I said, although the deck has to start with nature, the generated things don't have to be nature, they can just be spells. This is actually important because there is actually some other nature synergy in the deck, so of the 3 spells you're going to get, there's a beyond the 50% chance that you're going to get a nature spell. a reasonable chance you're going to get 2 of the 3 will be nature spells. But as I said, there aren't that many bad spells in Druid full stop, and a lot of them are cheap and just splashable out there. One I will say you have to be a bit careful on is Oaken Summons, which is a nature spell, funnily enough, where it summons a minion from your deck that costs 4 or less, and it just so happens that 2 of the minions that cost 4 or less that are probably in your Imbue deck are the Imbue Enablers, and they both have battle cries on them, which you would lose. And I think imbuing your button is really, really, really important, and I think you'll probably run both the spells and the minions to get your button chugging along as quickly as possible. So I think if you ever generate Oaken Summons, you'd have to be a little bit cautious to just play it. Again, another nature spell for Druid. It's Wood of Earth, 5 mana spell. Gain 5 armor, summon a random 5 cost minion, and give it Taunt. This card on paper looks kind of garbage, to be honest with you. If you ask me, I don't think it's particularly good. It's very close to something like Moonglade Portal, which was a Druid spell that didn't see any play in the past, which was 6 mana, gain 6 health, and summon a random 6 cost minion. You've moved the mana cost 1 down. You're getting a reduction in the random minion of 1 cost. You are giving it Taunt, which is like a nice little bonus, and also the 5 armor is better than 6 health probably. But even then, 5 armor is Ironhide, which is a 1 mana spell. All in all, like, a random 5 cost minion is probably going to be like a 4.5 to 5 stat line on both attack and defense, which isn't a great deal in standard for 5 mana. You'd probably say it's about a 4 mana effect. So bundling it together, you get about the mana cost you'd expect, which for standard isn't normally good enough to see play. Now, obviously, this has nature on it, so it might see play just because of necessity, that there aren't enough good nature spells to put into your deck, so you have to put Ward of Earth into your deck. It's worth noting, I could have gone through and worked out exactly what the stat line is. I simply couldn't be bothered, so I picked a selection of really high rolls and some low rolls for the 5-drop minions. You might get Sankazel, which is pretty good. You get a rush on it, immediate value, and it can turn into a location you can hide it. Not a bad card. Farseer Nabundo could be good if you're trying to cast a bunch of nature spells. You maybe copy a spell into the Nabundo after it dies, and that gives you more cast of the spell to give you more imbues. Just value, 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 basically. And similar to what we mentioned with the Shaman stuff with the Evolve package, Rocket Hopper is in the game still. Now it's a 5-cost minion, and it's a 10/10. If you can ignore the Overload, that is phenomenal. That is an insanely high roll, but again, that's what it is at the end of the day. It's a high roll. There are equally some low rolls. For example, Origami Frog. That's not a great 5-drop to get for 5 mana. Sandbox Scoundrel, Sleet Skater, basically any of the mini stuff, not great. So when you like look at it all together, it's around like 4.5, I would say, on the attack and defense side of things for a minion, which isn't that good for this mana cost. But again, necessity maybe will dictate if this card sees play or not. We also have Reforestation, 2 mana nature spell. Choose one, draw a spell or draw a minion. Hold this for 3 turns to do both. Alright, let me use Rogue as the benchmark here. Rogue had a spell called Door of Shadows, which was draw a spell for 1 mana. Now, it did have an additional part of the effect, and this did actually see play this card, but it was really because of the Infuse effect that gave you a temporary copy of a card in your deck. And this card saw play in a Miracle Rogue deck where you wanted a bunch of cheap spells, and this thing would try and infuse and find the temporary card being a cheap spell, and you would just play card after card after card after card and summon a ginormous ghost. Druid doesn't really have that right now. It has actually had Miracle decks in the not too distant past, but currently they don't really have that. Either way, Door of Shadows as 1 mana draw a spell wasn't great, but it was okay. It was passable. Dig for Treasure is actually seeing play currently in Rogue decks, which is 1 mana draw a minion. It has a tutoring-like effect. If it's a pirate, you get a coin. Generally speaking though, Dig for Treasure, you're fairly content to just get a minion from your deck, because you're really just using this as a tutor. So, for 1 mana, draw a spell or draw a minion is normally okay. It can make it into the cut of a deck depending on certain circumstances. Reforestation is 2 mana to do one of these things. That is a terrible deal. If you're not getting the double effect of this card, you are basically getting had. You are getting robbed. The game is, pulling you up by your ankles and shaking you for the loose change. It's not worth it. It's a really bad card, honestly. And what's even worse is the hold this for 3 turns is so unbelievably slow to get both of the effects. And even is both the effects good enough? Rogue also had a spell called Swindle, which was 2 mana, draw a spell, combo, and a minion. Rogue can normally combo with very cheap cards, so let's say at most you're playing 3 mana for this. Swindle didn't really see that much play. And Swindle was faster than Reforestation was, so it had that going for it. So Again, maybe necessity forces your hand on Reforestation, but I think in a vacuum, this card is extremely bad. Also, there is, you know, Fandral is in the game, so maybe you can get the choose one effects both from Fandral instead. Maybe put that in that deck, but I'm actually not sure there's enough choose one cards right now that you'd put into that deck to justify Fandral. We'll have to see when, you know, everything settles together. It's actually quite hard right now as well to do, like, the theory crafting stuff, because the new core set cards haven't, like, rotated onto the website yet, so it's really awkward to make these videos, and it'll be hard to do the star rating videos later on. We also have another payoff for casting nature spells. This is kind of why I was alluding to generated cards being nature spells earlier. We have Grove Shaper. 5 mana 3/6 minion. After you cast a nature spell, summon a 2/2 Treant with Death Rattle, get a copy of that spell. This card has got some real potential about it. It's actually quite a spooky little card. We've had a few cards in the history of Hearthstone which are like, if you cast a spell, get a copy of... Sorry, not get a copy, get a spell back. Sethek Veilweaver was one of the examples. I think Lyre is like one of the real classic cards of this, where you were casting spells, you would get a random pre-spell to your hand, and it was like self-proliferate the card itself. Lock and Load also was in Hunter, and they could do a similar thing for Hunter cards. Not spells, but cards in general. Grove Shaper, though, if you're casting nature spells, you're going to get a copy of that card in particular, which in its own right is a pretty powerful effect if you're copying an insanely powerful nature spell. Actually, there's a potential for this card to be very close to a very, very, very strong card that got banned in Wild. And that is Test Subject. So this is the old version of Test Subject. It has been changed now, so it's not got this effect. But Test Subject used to say, return any spells you cast on this minion to your hand. So there was a restriction on Test Subject. It had to be targeted spells on the Test Subject that it could copy, basically. Grove Shaper, it has to be nature spells instead. I'd probably say nature spells are a more finite pool than targeted spells in Priest at that time, to be fair, when this was seeing some play. But both of them lead you to copying spells. And this can lead to some very funny situations if you can somewhat abuse the copying scenario. In the case of Test Subject, what you used to do was double the health of the Test Subject. You would then set like its attack equal to its health, and you'd go through a few steps where eventually you would like cast all these spells on it, and then you would trigger the Death Rattle twice on it and get double the cards back, and you'd repeat that over and over again on a minion with charge until you got like a thousand minion where it would just one-shot anyone. So that was the old version of Test Subject. By the way, in case you're intrigued by the new version, it now puts the spells into your deck instead. So it puts a road bump in the way. And actually, if you look at the Grove Shaper, there is just a natural road bump, right? That's not going immediately back into your hand. They're going into a minion that you then have to destroy. And this is kind of where I think the weakness of this card will be. Because I can't really think of a way to abuse it. Because there only really is like a very, very finite pool of nature spells that can actually do any damage to the opponent. Living Roots is probably the one that has the most potential to be abused. You could put a Living Roots to your opponent's face for 2 damage, and if you could kill the Treant and maybe get some like mana discounts along the way, you could see a world where you just keep machine gunning your opponent down with Living Roots. And there is a spell damage package, right, in Druid. So there is like some theory there. You could get like Bottomless Toy Chest to copy these spell damage things and other spell damage locations and that type of thing. Rising Waves as well could be a way to trigger the death rattles of your own minions. The big issue about all this is if you're trying to do this type of thing, you can't do the Hamel thing because then you've put spells into your deck that are not nature. So do I think there's going to be this Grave Shaper nature spell deck that exists out there with an OTK? If there is, I can't find in standard at the very least, so I'm not entirely certain. I think Grove Shaper will just be used to get some form of value. And actually, one way it could generate value is Overgrown Beanstalk, I believe, is still going to be in the core set next rotation. And Grove Shaper is very specifically summoning Treants. And Treants work with Overgrown Beanstalk as well, which also summons a Treant. And potentially you play your Overgrown Beanstalk with Grove Shaper on the field. It generates you a additional card for each Treant you control, which in the case you've like maybe front-loaded some nature spells into this as well, like with Innovate and that type of thing. You might draw a really big number of cards with this Overgrown Beanstalk, maybe 3 or 4 cards. And one of the Treants gets an Overgrown Beanstalk in it. You killed that Treant, you get the Overgrown Beanstalk back, you play another Overgrown Beanstalk. I can actually see this being a really disgusting draw engine. I do appreciate, I'm talking about like an 8 mana combo at the very least right now. However, remember, Druid doesn't do things the normal way. Every class has the ability to go to 15 mana now. Druid can go well beyond that as well, certainly through certain circumstances. Again, a lot of those circumstances require you not to have you'd have to have non-nature spells in your deck, which wouldn't work with Hamel, but maybe you are consistent enough to generate them via other means. We'll have to see. I actually think this is also part of the reason why ETC is leaving the core set, because you could have snuck very sneakily non-nature spells into a Druid. Now you can't, because ETC won't be in the game. Also worth noting, there were some treants added to the neutral package. Maybe you put some Tranquil Treants and Twisted Treants into this deck as well, just to give you even more draw on your Overgrown Beanstalk. And then again, maybe you actually run this as a token deck instead, right? And use Power of the Wild. But again, Power of the Wild, not nature spell. Hamel doesn't like that, so Grove Shaper and this nature package maybe goes in a different direction to Hamel, but I'm not sure there's enough about it to actually do something. One final thing worth mentioning, if you were going for like true ginormous value, Shaladrasil is a nature spell, so you could potentially cast Shaladrasil with Grove Shaper on the field, and one of these little fucking treants would have a Shaladrasil in it, which is a disgusting amount of value. It's also disgustingly slow, because you are spending 12 mana on basically 5-8 in stats, which is not a great deal, but maybe if the game goes slow enough and it does come into a value smorgasbord, that is the type of greed that could push you over the edge. Especially if you can corrupt the Shaladrasil first before you Grove Shaper it. That could be disgusting. One final thing I'll just mention about this, just go back to the test subject thing where I said I couldn't think of a way to break it in Standard. I can think of a way to break it in Wild though, and the way you could break this in Wild is to use Naturalize, because Naturalize is a nature spell that destroys a minion and causes your opponent to draw 2 cards. And if you play a Grove Shaper and you play some other nature spell to seed the reaction, again, this could be an Innovate, for example, you will get a Grove Shaper and a 2/2 Treant. You could then Naturalize your Treant to cause your opponent to draw 2 cards. It would then generate a 2/2 Treant with a Naturalize in it. You would then use your second Naturalize to Naturalize the Naturalized Treant, which would kill it, give your Naturalize, and cause your opponent to draw 2 cards, and summon a Treant with Naturalize. And you could endlessly just kill Treants, assuming you had the mana for it, and cause your opponent to deck out. And there is a way in Wild as well to get your nature spells down in cost. There is Lady Anacondra, which makes your nature spells cost 2 less. Now, I don't know how reasonable this is set up in Wild, because I just don't play Wild. It's just, it's wild to me that you would play Wild, because the power levels are crazy. But if you could get Grove Shaper onto the field with Lady Anacondra, and then have some sort of 2 or less nature spell, you basically are going to win the game. It's like a guaranteed lethal, because you'll just cause your opponent to deck out endlessly. So watch out for this. I don't know if this is truly viable in Wild. It might simply be too slow, but watch this space, basically. We also get to the other legendary minion now, Forest Lord Cenarius. 10 mana 5/6 minion. Choose thrice. Give your other minions +1/+3, or summon a 5/5 ancient with Taunt. Obviously, this is a play on Cenarius, who is leaving the core set, by the way. Probably to make room for the Forest Lord Cenarius. Yeah, sure, this card is okay. Worth noting as well that Fandral, as I said, is coming back into the game, but only works on choose 1 cards, not choose thrice cards, so this won't work on, thankfully, won't work on Forest Lord Cenarius, because otherwise that would be really disgusting. So again, I think there was a very much intended situation here from the development team to not let Fandral work with Forest Lord Cenarius. Anyway, to deal with the minion itself, it's kind of easiest to take the 2 extreme examples where you choose give your other minions +1/+3 3 times, or the Ancient with Taunt 3 times. If you're getting the +1/+3, which again would require you to have some sort of tokeny based board state, you're effectively giving all of your minions Bloodlust in terms of the fast response. Because realistically, if you're giving your board a big stat line, you kind of want to kill them quickly before your opponent can respond to it. So 3 attack to all minions, which is choosing the +1/+3 option 3 times, is Bloodlust. And again, I think it was very intentionally designed in such a way that you didn't get front-loaded the attack, so you couldn't do some sort of deck where you summoned a bunch of beanies, gave them all +2/+2 instead, which is very close to the Cenarius effect, right? And then run it over your opponent's face. I guess it was deemed to be too strong. And let's say +2/+2, it would have been +6/+6, because you triplicate that effect. Obviously, it's not quite the same as Bloodlust either, because Bloodlust was just for that turn. This is endless, so as long as the minions live, you can swing with them on a future turn. But the problem is, are your minions going to live through that? Probably not. Like, a lot of decks, if this was a strong thing, will have some sort of response for a big board full of minions. Otherwise, they're going to cry. And actually, there's a pretty good, guy for that. It's called the Ceaseless Expanse. So, if this card is anywhere near strong enough with a token deck, Ceaseless Expanse probably sees play in almost every single deck just to try and counteract this. Also worth noting, Bloodlust, 5 mana. Forest Lord Scenarios, 10 mana. He's pretty beefy, right? He's a big boy. The other side of things, if you're getting 3 5/5 Ancients with Taunt, which by the way is a really big stat line for 10 mana, you're getting 23 in stats, where 15 of them have Taunt. That's pretty big, right? The card I've compared this to a little bit is Elise. Now, Elise actually gives you a bit more bang for your buck because you get an additional minion through Elise. However, Forest Lord Scenarios, who I think gives you like 7 stats less, does give you 3 Taunts in the process, so it does somewhat compare out, especially since Elise also requires you to have a Highlander deck. Forest Lord Scenarios doesn't. I do appreciate, though, Forest Lord Scenarios does cost 2 more. And this is kind of like inherently the problem with this card and kind of why I don't see it working right now. But again, maybe with the rotation, things like this could work nowadays. Elise saw basically no play in Priest. Like, the Control Priest archetype and the Highlander Priest archetype was super underwhelming. And it was fine when you got to Elise, right, and you played Elise, it was a lot of value. But getting to 8 mana was actually quite difficult for a lot of decks in a world full of aggression. And Druid isn't great with dealing with early game aggression. Priest is meant to be, but they weren't particularly great at it either. There were some deck lists which did actually perform in, like, legend level on the Highlander Priest deck, but it never really went to, like, the tippy toppies of the tier ratings. Forest Lord Scenarios is just super expensive. It's really going to be, like, hard to stay alive for it to come up. So, I'm not sure about it. It's also worth noting, and I've not really put it on the slide, you could, like, generate the Ancient, and then get your minions +1/+3, in which case you're getting, like, 2 6/8s instead of another 5/5, which is actually not a terrible deal. And they have Taunt as well, so I think the value in this card will actually lie in not picking all of one option or all of the other one. You're going to mix and match just a little bit. But I do feel like the strongest option is probably just to take 2 Ancients and then give them +1/3 to give them a bit more health on the Taunt side of things. And I also think this card is just going to be simply too slow at 10 mana. It's not unfair enough, I think, for modern Hearthstone. Also, just like one final nail in the coffin of this card, you might not run it in the Imbue deck, because I've kind of like linked it to the Imbue deck, but it probably doesn't make that list. Which means you could do some Druid shenanigans. Druid is one of the great classes for cheating. They can raise their maximum mana. They can gain mana crystals early. They can get to 10 earlier than your opponent. They might be able to get to turn 10 while you're on, turn 6, for example. The issue with that, though, is Forest Lord Scenarios better than Dungar? And I sat there and thought about it, and I was like, you know what? Even on the highest of high rolls of Scenarios, assuming you're on an empty board right now, I just don't think it's ever better than playing Dungar, and then getting, 3 big boys from your deck that are, like, super hard to remove. So, yeah, I think Forest Lord Scenarios is a card that can kind of fill a similar niche to Dungar, but it's just worse than Dungar. It also costs 1 more mana than it, so I don't see this card seeing any play, to be honest with you. Then to get back to the Imbue stuff, and this will probably see play in the Imbue stuff. Actually, I think this is probably the best card in the Imbue deck, to be honest with you. Dreambound Disciple. 3 mana 3/3. Battlecry and Death Rattle. Your next hero power costs 0. That's a really strong effect, honestly. Like, deceptively strong. Bearing in mind stuff like Amplified Snowflurry and Tour Guide. Actually, a lot of cards that say make your hero power cost 0. And it's just your next one, not this turn. Often are really strong, like Tour Guide snuck into a lot of decks. I do appreciate Amplified Snowflurry also made your hero power freeze, which was good to slow the game down, because normally you ran this in a deck that wanted to go a little bit later on. Dreambound Disciple gives you that next hero power cost 0. It is understated, which is fine, because Tour Guide was understated too. But you get another reduction cost in your hero power on the Death Rattle as well, which is seriously spooky. Especially when you bear in mind, if you're going to put this into your Imbue deck, which I think this will definitely go into your Imbue deck, your bottom is summon a 1/1, which means at the very worst, you play Dreambound Disciple, and you're getting 3 mana for 4/4 in stats, where, 1/1 of it is split off from the 3/3. And that's not that bad. That's actually not a bad deal, and it's got an upside. Death Rattle, you're going to get another 1/1 down the line. I think that's not a bad stat line for standard. And then, as I said, Druid has got a lot of cheap spell options. I think it's very reasonable before turn 3, if you make your deck in such a way, that you might be able to imbue before turn 3 with the effect of Hammer beyond the start of game effect. In which case, it's 3 mana 5/5 with the promise of a 2/2 down the line. And that is really, really good, so I think Dreambound Disciple is an extremely solid card. My only, like, slight oddity about this card, I like the art, but it feels really odd to Hearthstone. Like, it feels kind of... I don't even know what to say about it. It feels like it's a very Hearthstone-y card, but it feels, at the same time, the art is just very slightly different from the rest of the set. I can't put my finger on it. It feels like this is like an old Magic card. I think that's the best way I could call it, so... I don't mind it, I don't dislike it, but something about the art, like, is making me go, this is odd, but I can't put my finger on it. Anyway, the other thing to mention about this is you don't even have to cast 2 spells before turn 3. You could just play a Bitterbloom Knight on 2 as well to give you this imbue immediately. And I think that's going to be a seriously scary play. You see your Druid become Blessing of the Golem. On turn 2, they play Bitterbloom Knight. And on turn 3, they play the Druidbound Disciple. That's a really scary curve, and it's going to break the back of a lot of decks. So I actually think if this imbue deck is going to work, I think a big part of it is going to be this Dreambound Disciple, just making a really scary early play in Druid decks. The final card for Druid is Evergreen Stag. This may be the most pack filler card I've ever seen. 6 mana 6/7 beast, elusive, lifesteal, taunt. There it is, no other bells and whistles attached about it. It's basically just better Stone Drake, I suppose. Stone Drake sees no play, it is 10 stats for 6 mana, and you get Divine Shield on it. It also has Elemental Dragon Tribe on it. Evergreen Stag has got a Beast Tribe on it instead, but you're getting 5 more stats for the cost. You do trade away one of the keywords on it, but it's probably one of the weaker keywords of the ones on this card. It's probably better to have Elusive on it instead of Divine Shield. It makes it harder to deal with spells. Also, it's got a more aggressive stat line, so it is a bit more of a threat if you leave it on the board. And if you're some sort of, like, you know, not control deck, but if you're a slower deck, the Lifesteal Taunt is really annoying for any minion-based deck, so there's a lot of things going for it, but I kind of see this going the same way as Shield of Askara, which, again, instead of having Elusive on it, has Divine Shield, and it has 1 fewer stats. This card doesn't see any play in Priest. I don't think there's enough Beast Package in Druid. I think, in fact, there is no Beast Package in Druid right now for this card to see any play in Druid. I just think it's way, way too fair, so probably won't see any play. Now we get to Warrior. We've seen 3 cards in Warrior already. Ominous Nightmares, the Dark Rider, and Afflicted Devastator. When I saw these 3 cards, I said there were 3 things I was expecting for Warrior. One of them is obviously the Dark Gift package. They are one of the Dark Gift classes, so I figured there was going to be a package associated with Dark Gifts. I assumed there was going to be a Dragon package because we saw a lot of Dragon cards, and Dark Rider wants you to hold a dragon, and Afflicted Devastator is a dragon. And then finally, I kind of assumed with Ominous Nightmare that we might get an Enraged package, but that was the one I was least sure of. Anyway, let's go see the Enraged package right now with the legendary minion Tortola. 10 mana, 1/30 beast. Taunt elusive. After this takes damage, gain 1 armor and give this minion +1 attack. Oh boy, this is a stat line. I always say, you know, I say like this minion, you know, it's understated for the cost. 10 mana for 31 stats is probably, and you might laugh at me, I think it's about par. I think a 10 mana 15/15 is about the realms where you might see a neutral minion scene play in standard, because it has a threat of a 2-turn lethal if you can't deal with it. Tortola has got that amount of stats, but it's statted unbelievably defensive. I actually hate this card, by the way. I think this is truly, truly terrible Hearthstone design. It's actually one of the things that's like putting me off of the game. What this card does is so unbelievably disgusting that it just feels like it's grossly unfair. It's a bit like, I sometimes talk about this, like, triangle, and it's not truly like, you know, rock, paper, scissors triangle, but generally speaking, an aggro deck would beat a combo deck would beat a control deck, and a control deck would beat an aggro deck. Obviously, the game would be boring if that was 100% true, but where I think the game, like, is at its most interesting is when that matchup is, like, 55% in, like, your favor of that triangle. But the weaker deck sells, like, a 45-ish% chance of winning the game. Tortola is so disgustingly good at just dealing with aggressive minion-based decks that it basically means that if you play Tortola into an aggressive minion-based deck, you win the game. on the spot, because it's effectively 10 mana give your hero 30 health, right? It has Taunt on it, so your opponent's minions have to run into it. It's elusive as well, which is actually probably the biggest part of this, which makes it extremely hard to remove with any spells. You have to have an untargeted spell to deal with it, or some sort of minion-based destruction instead, or a bounce type thing, again, minion-based. So it's really, really, really obnoxious, this guy. And again, every time this minion gets hit, it gets stronger and becomes more and more threatening. It's also giving you more and more armor. So when I said this is giving you a hero 30 health, it's actually more than 30 health. So, cool. Also, I forgot to mention, this is basically Eternium Rover and Frothing Berserker having a baby together. It came out with a Tortola, apparently, that's what happens. It's obviously not quite true. You're getting 1 fewer armor on the Eternium Rover as the Tortola. Obviously, you're getting 30 health, which is a pretty big deal. And Frothing Berserker worked for any minion that took damage, whereas Tortola is just that minion itself. Okay, let's talk about some of the good things about this card, though, first, before I talk about why I think this card actually won't see any play. It obviously has a great synergy with Enrage stuff. It has so much health for you to do these ping and rage effects onto it, and it itself has a benefit, so if you can give it an Enrage effect with a benefit as well, for example, Sanguine Depths, where you ping a minion for 1 damage, and you give it 2 attack. In the case of Tortola, you're doing 1 damage to it and giving it 3 attack instead, which is a pretty nice deal, right? Also worth mentioning, Elusive works, both ways, so you can't buff your own minion easily with Elusive, at least on the field, because your spells can't target either, but I believe the locations are fine. Ravaging Ghoul is rotating into the core set, in case you're wondering, which is another good way to set off your Enrage mechanics. It doesn't have an upside like Sanguine Depths, but again, you're getting 1 armor and 1 attack for playing the Ravaging Ghoul, which is a pretty decent trade. Because as I said, Tortola on its own right, if it wasn't getting attacked, it's actually not that scary, it's going to take 30 turns for it to kill you. But as it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, then it becomes a bit of a threat, and a very hard to remove threat as well. I think the biggest thing that everyone's like peeing and pooing over right now, you can chemical spell this. It's a huge minion, so it's almost certainly going to be the biggest minion in your hand, unless you're running the Ceaseless Expanse. And if you can chemical spell this on 5, and you're playing against an aggro deck, you win. Congratulations, you've won the game, for a 2-card combo on turn 5. Because Chemical Spell will reduce this, admittedly, to a 25 health minion, but it doesn't matter, because it has Taunt, Elusive, it's going to be hard to remove. Basically, give your hero 25 health plus whatever armor you get from it, and it has 2 attack in this case, so it's easier to trade into other things, and a bit more threatening, so it's a really, really, really disgusting combo wombo. You can also try and food fight this out. I think this is much, much less likely, but if you can find a way before, turn 3 to food fight and kill the entree, you might be able to cheat a Tortola out by turn 3. It probably isn't happening though, because I actually can't think of a good way to kill this on 3. And also it would require you to basically only have Tortola in your deck, which means if you drew it before the food fight went off, you would lose. So it's probably not going to happen, but bear in mind, if you see a food fight, you might want to be careful with that entree, because boy, it could be a big entree. And by the way, this isn't really even the full package of not destruction, the full package of disgust. You can still tourist into Druid, which means you can use their taunt package as well. They have Tortolan Traveler, which is a tutor for taunt minions. So this Tortola you wanted to chemical spell, don't worry buddy, you can pull it into your hand. There's actually other ways as well of just drawing taunt cards in Warrior as well. And it has a tribe. It's a beast, so you can use all you can eat as well to pull it out of your deck, assuming you have no other beasts in the deck. So there are options to choose for this card for your chemical spell. And obviously, the big thing is, this is a taunt minion. So you can Hydration Station it. So if you kill it 1 time, you're like, holy shit, I'm glad I put Bob in my deck. Don't worry, Hydration Station is going to bring it back again. Actually, if you Bob it, you won't get it back because you're probably going to steal it. If you kill it with some other means, good luck, guys. Hydration Station is bringing it back. So it's really pretty disgusting. But actually, this comes to the root of it. I think this card will see no play because it's actually not that good. Because you can Bob it. Bob is seeing a lot of play in a lot of decks. If you just steal this guy, you're fucked, right? You just lose the game. Ignoring the fact as well, by the way, this is 10 mana, so actually truly aggressive decks that you don't get the chemical spell into, you're not going to play the Tortola before you lose the game anyway, so the stat line is just LOL. It's only really scary if you can cheat it out a little bit earlier than that. Also, and this is like the big thing that's going to kill it, why would you not just use it on Killiax? Killiax kills Tortola in 1 hit. So you get 1 armor for it, cool, you played a 10 mana 130, LOL, Zilex is just going to kill it immediately. There's also some untargeted destruction things in minion pieces. For example, and again, this is where I'm getting at with this taunt package, the Starship Warrior package has Yamato Cannon in it. If your only minion is Totola, which is a pretty good chance it's only going to be Totola since it's a 10 mana minion, it's pretty hard to play it with something else, and Yamato Cannon hits it, you're fucked. It doesn't matter about the elusive stuff, you're going to have the minion died. I do appreciate you could Hydration Station it back, but it's worse than Hydration Stationing Ziliax. Ceaseless Expanse and any non-targeted spells like Black Hole also kill this thing, so again, if you're into a Control v Control matchup, the Totola is just too fragile and isn't threatening enough to beat a fellow Control deck. And then finally, the Black Knight is rotating into the core set. If this card was really, really, really a big issue, you can Black Knight it one time and kill it. So, one other thing I'll just mention, Odin's rotated out as well. Some people mention on on Twitter, that website, that, oh my god, we can Odin and then Blade Storm and you get 30 attack and you can just one-shot someone. Both these cards are rotating out, so you can't do that, but in Wild, go knock yourself out. I suspect it's too slow for Wild, but you can try and do a Totola, Blade Storm, Odin combo wombo. But yeah, I don't think that card will see any play just because there are better things to Hydration Station. We also have Egg Basher, Battlecry, deal 1 damage to a minion and give it +4 attack. And it's 3/5 stat line. So it's understated for a 4-drop, but the effect is actually pretty strong. It's basically Cruel Taskmaster's effect, but it's doubled the attack. Now, Cruel Taskmaster is probably easier to weave into a play, being a 2-mana 2/2, but you only got half the attack from it. I actually do think Cruel Taskmaster is probably a little bit better than the Egg Basher, because it probably matters more that you can trigger the Enrage for it cheaper than it costing twice as much, but you're getting more of an effect on the Egg Basher. Clearly, this isn't intended to be used with Totola, by the way. You're meant to play a Totola, you bash it with an egg, and I guess you're bashing it with a tree stump, and it is an egg. Is that how that works? I don't know. Either way, you do 1 damage to the Totola, which gives you 1 armor, gives you an additional attack, and then +4 attack on the Egg Basher, so it turns it into a 6/29. That is actually really scary. 6 damage, you're now talking. You're actually motoring along a little bit. There are also a few Enraged cards in Warrior right now. We've not really mentioned them yet, but Alloy Advisor is in there if you want to gain a bunch of armor. You could ping the Alloy Advisor with the Egg Basher, and you can turn that into a 6/5. And you gain 3 armor in the process. Also, Bloodhoof Brave is rotating back into the core set. You ping this thing, it gains 7 attack. It becomes a 4-mana 9/5 with Taunt. That is scary if you can't deal with the 9/5 in time. Actually, it's more scary if you can't deal with the 2/6 on 4 and you play Egg Basher on 5, or you cheat out Bloodhoof on 3. That is a serious amount of damage that is potentially incoming, so I can see a world where Egg Basher sees play in the Bloodhoof Brave deck. And then we have another spell, Siphoning Growth. 1 mana, warrior spell, destroy a friendly minion to gain 8 armor. Kind of weird, but let's bear with this card. So, warrior is probably the class that has the classic destroy a guy, get some sort of reward. And in fact, they've had stuff to do with health. Sacrificial Pact, destroy a friendly demon, you got 5 health. Or Dark Pact, you destroyed a friendly minion, you got 8 health. The 8 health on Dark Pact is very similar to Siphoning Growth, and I think this is kind of where it was combined. Obviously, it's better to gain armor, because armor always will go onto your hero, whereas health might overheal you, and you're not going to get the value. And actually, Dark Pact and Sacrificial Pact, despite all this, saw bits of play. There were reasons to destroy minions in Warlock. Here becomes my issue. How many reasons are there to destroy cards in Warrior? Yeah. Okay, well, there is the Afflicted Devastator that we saw, where obviously it's got a really, really powerful death rattle. You could ping your own Afflicted Devastator and deal 3 to all. However, it was a 6/6, so it's not a great deal, honestly, if you do that type of thing. You could hit one of the Fireworker Boombots. That's far more reasonable to trigger a Boombot. That is a positive thing that's going to happen for you. The problem is you have to play Fireworker in your deck, which is not a bad warrior deck, but it's still pretty niche just to trigger one of the Boombot effects with its Siphoning Growth to gain 8 armor in the process. After that, I was like, book your soldiers, I guess? There really isn't that many options. Now, I will say, I'm being a bit unfair to you here. There is a card later on that works with the Siphoning Growth, but beyond that card we're going to see, there are not that many options for Warrior to trigger their own minions' death rattles or cheap minions that Warrior might want to kill. I actually got to the point as well where maybe there's stuff from Starport, you might want to kill it yourself, or just Starship pieces in general to stop your opponent stealing them in any way or silencing them. You could just Siphoning Growth one of these, like 2/1s, for example. You don't really care about the 2/1 that much. The 8 armor may be worth more to you than the 2/1 even, so that's not a crazy idea. This card, by the way, may have seen some play in Odin Warrior, but again, Odin has rotated out, so 1 mana gain 8 armor. Doesn't matter. Alright, now we're going to be fair. This is the card that obviously works with it. Clutch of Corruption. 2 mana, Location, with 2 uses. Choose a friendly dragon. Summon a 0/2 egg that hatches into a copy of it. And the egg is a horrible egg, which is the 1 mana 0/2 egg. With Death Rattle, summon a card, which is obviously the thing you copy with the Clutch of Corruption. There we go, this is what Siphoning Growth is for. It's meant to trigger your own horrible egg, of course. I'm a fool. Why didn't I think of that? Cool. That's fine, yeah. Horrible egg, if you can trigger that, and, you know, you've got a good dragon in it, that's a great deal. You get 8 armor, you get a dragon back. Cool, very good. And actually, just in general, compare this chromatic egg from the past, which was 5 mana 0/3 Battlecry, secretly discover a dragon to hatch into, Death Rattle, hatch. This Clutch of Corruption is basically 2 mana to copy a dragon, and you get to pick the dragon. It does require you to spend the mana of the dragon, though, to play it onto the board. And this is kind of my issue with this package. It's not going to be very quick, is it? Assuming you're going to get cheating out a fairly big dragon, it's going to require you to go later into the game, which means your location is basically 2 mana do nothing until you get to that point. And doing nothing for 2 mana is actually pretty hard to do, especially in some of the early game of Hearthstone. But maybe if there are some early game dragons that are worth killing, then the Siphoning Growth isn't a bad deal, right? It lets you survive long enough to get to those big dragons that are going to win you the game. I think one of the big cards actually that will work with this is Afflicted Devastator again. This card is going to come up a few times, by the way. The Battle Cry is the weak part of this card. If you can Clutch of Corruption this thing and put it into the Horrible Egg, then you get the Afflicted Devastator back as a 4 mana 6/6, and it's got a really good Death Rattle on it, right? 3 damage to all enemy minions without the Battle Cry negative, so that's actually a pretty good deal. I think that's the really scary combo with all of these cards, that you Clutch of Corruption your Afflicted Devastator, you ping your own Horrible Egg at some point with, I mean, any card, but the 1 mana, no, sorry, just kill a guy, gain 8 armor, and then suddenly you've got a few Afflicted Devastators on the board, which is pretty spicy. After that, though, again, things start to go a bit downhill, because generally speaking, you want minions with, like, Death Rattles or good aura effects, because you don't get the Battle Cry, right, when it gets summoned to the field. Illusory Greenwing is another one of these Death Rattle medium-strength dragons, where down the line, you're going to get some 4/5 dragons into your deck that summoned when drawn. Problem, you might not draw them, so it's a little bit inconsistent. This does have Taunt, though, so at least it can protect you for a bit longer to get these late-game dragons. After that, I was clutching at straws. I was like, Briarspore Drake, you copy a ginormous guy, and, you know, you pop the egg, because, again, you can go beyond 10 mana crystals, and you have 2 Briarspore Drakes on the field that go into 2 minions and do big damage. Maybe that's a thing, but it's, again, pretty slow. And then beyond that, you're like, what dragons rotate into the core set? Chillmore? Is Chillmore good enough to see play anymore? Is Runaway Brackwing, again, rotating into the core set, good enough to see play? Is Sleepy Dragon good enough to see play, which I think is being retained in the core set? There's actually kind of not a great dragon package, in my opinion, right now. I think there's a significant number of weaker dragons, so I'm actually not sure if this is going to work. And again, I'll talk more about this as we see more of the dragon package, because there is more of it. One final thing is, if this does work, and, you know, you don't get that many uses of the location, maybe you want to scrapbooking student the location to get more eggs, to copy more dragons. I think that's really slow, though. A 5 mana 5/5 copy a location, probably not going to be good enough. But yeah, as I said, the obvious idea here is that you're going to Siphon Growth your Horrible Egg. Beyond that, though, how do you deal with the Death Rattles? And again, this becomes a bit of the issue of the package. Warrior doesn't really have a Death Rattle package, and by proxy, they don't really have great ways to trigger Death Rattles other than the minions just dying naturally. One of the ways actually that you could trigger the eggs as well is you could use the Afflicted Devastator effect, where the Battle Cries deal 3 damage to all other friendly minions, to pop all of your eggs. Whatever dragons they'd copied in the eggs, you get them, you know, onto the field. And you still get your Afflicted Devastator as well, so you get another upside for playing the Afflicted Devastator. So, again, I feel like this card is the crux of the entire deck. If you have a bunch of Afflicted Devastators, or you generate a bunch of them, I can see a world where this package works, but beyond that, it seems very, very, very specific. Because again, after this, I was like, holy shit, like, Primordial Drake could do it, but a lot of the other cards in Warrior right now are enraged cards, so they only do 1 damage, which doesn't pop the egg, so you'd have to hit them with 2 enraged cards, and at that point, it's not a great deal, because you're probably playing, like, a 3-card combo to copy a dragon, which isn't that good, in my opinion. The other way I was thinking of doing this is you could use Hostile Invader. This is a card that does see playing Control Warrior decks, but the problem with that is it's not a dragon. do you want to put a non-dragon in your dragon deck? Bearing in mind that one of the dragons requires you to be holding dragons, so you probably want to have more dragons in your deck than non-dragons. Maybe you could fit in a hostile invader, but again, it's 2 damage to all other minions, and it's on spellburst, and it's on death rattle. It could be a way to, like, repetitively break your eggs. Then we get to one of the other payoffs for dragon cards, Broodkeeper. 2 mana 2/3 minion with Battlecry. If you're holding a dragon, equip a 2/2 sword. And the 2/2 sword is a Nightmare Slicer. Very nice. Actually, this card is actually pretty good. When I first saw this, I was like, it's kind of like N'Zoth's first mate, right? Which was a 1 mana 1/1 pirate that Battlecry equipped a 1/3 Rusty Hook. This was pretty good in Pirate Warrior back in the day. And this actually is a hint of why I think the Broodkeeper has got like a bit of a downside to it. It doesn't have a dragon tribe on its card. It's like not a self-fulfilling prophecy of a card. You really want these cards where if it's holding a X, do something, to also be one of those X cards. So any of your other cards that say that, and there is another one in Warrior, can also trigger off that card, and you can just pick which one you want to use in the situation you're in. N'Zoth had a pirate tag on it, which meant that he worked with any of the pirate cards back then. Also, at that point, you had a lot of upgrading your weapon type effects. With Broodkeeper in modern Hearthstone, there aren't really ways to upgrade your weapon, but still, 2 mana 2/3 isn't that understated, right? It's basically a par score for a 2-drop. N'Zoth was understated for a 1-drop, and the 2/2 weapon that you get from it is pretty solid, right? It's not a bad deal. In fact, I think it's a pretty good card, honestly. I think some people would be tempted as well to compare this to Arathi Weaponsmith, just because it generates a 2/2 weapon as well. But bear in mind, Arathi Weaponsmith was severely understated. For a 4-drop, you only got 6 stats. Broodkeeper is way better statted, and you're getting this weapon up front earlier, so I think it's actually a pretty good early card if you're trying to deal with, even if you're trying to be a bit more aggressive, but dealing with early aggression as well. That 2-attack weapon you can swing 2 times, it's probably going to clear off a bunch of tokens your opponent was playing to swarm the board with. I think that's not a bad deal, right? The only downside, as I said, is it isn't a dragon itself, so you'd have to run other dragons to make it work, but yeah, if Dragon Warrior works, this card will almost certainly see play in that deck. Now here we are, ladies and gentlemen, the big dragon. This is the whole reason for the dragon package. Yusondere. I think that's, Yusondre? I don't know how you pronounce this. I'm going to say Yusondere, like, you know, it's a Kudere dragon type thing. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. 7 mana 8/5 dragon. Taunt, Death Rattle. Summon a random dragon for each time Yusondere has died this game. Well, okay, when I first saw this card, the first thing I immediately thought of was Raden. This was a card that saw basically no play in Priest, but they have similar gimmicks. Raden wanted you to play a bunch of cards that didn't start in your deck, and had the Taunt Death Rattle type effect on it. It actually got buffed, I think, to have Taunt. It didn't originally have it, but even after they put Taunt on it, it saw no play. And obviously, you could put the minions into Raden, generally speaking, that you wanted to. You could generate copies of other minions that you think were good minions. So in the case of, like, Raden, you might try and put in a few Titans or something. You might put in, I don't know, some ginormous elemental that died and kills your opponent and gives you lifesteal, that type of thing. Stuff that maybe you resurrect that didn't originally have start in your deck, it came from the resurrect pool. You could do all those things to put into Raden, and then when Raden died, you would have a big board at the end of it. Now, Yusondere, or Yusondere, of course, that's how we have to call it, isn't as like, explosive as Raden is at first. However, it's more of a card that could self-fulfill itself rather than Raden. Raden is kind of like a one-and-done type thing, unless you copied the Raden as well, which was, like, completely stupid, because you would definitely want to copy the Titan and put those copies of the Titans into your Raden instead. But if you didn't go onto that pathway, it was a one-and-done type strat, right? As long as you keep generating copies of Yusondere, it gets better and better and better over time. That is the theory of this card. Obviously, one of the ways you're meant to proc this is to use Clutch of Corruption. You play your Yusondere, and you Clutch of Corruption it, which means that when you get the egg breaking, and the Yusondere on the board dies, then the Yusondere that comes from the Clutch of Corruption will summon 2 dragons when it dies. And then obviously the intention is you play another Clutch of Corruption on the Yusondere, and you get more and more Yusunderes as the game goes on, and they get progressively more and more scary. Problem, will the game last that long? And this kind of gets to the point of Yusondere. On the first time you're playing it, it's a 7 mana 8/5 Taunt, which is a bit understated for 7 mana. It is at least Taunt, so it's going to protect you from some sort of aggression. And you're getting a random dragon, right? That's good. Is a random dragon good? I'm not sure. One other thing I'll say about this card is it's another one of these taunt warrior cards, which means you can go into Druid land and you can hydration station your Yasundare to give you more Yasundares over the course of the game. You can also cube Yasundare in this hydration station deck to get lots of Yasundare. So there actually are quite a lot of ways for warrior to endlessly play this card, and there's actually another way of doing it that we'll see later. But as I said, the problem, Adaptive Amalgam is a dragon in the dragon pool. Twilight Drake is a dragon in the dragon pool. Origami Dragon is a dragon in the dragon pool. Now you might be saying, Andalono, you're picking the bad dragons, right? Sometimes you're going to hit the good dragons. Okay, let's play the game of the good dragons. You might hit Briarspawn Drake. That's a lot of stats off of Yasundare, and it's got a bit of a threat associated with it, right? Cool. I like it. Next, I have Kalagos. I'm not messing around too much here. Beyond just getting a big stat line, which probably would be a reasonable deal, right? If you got like 8/8 stat lines or 7/7 stat lines on your Yasundare. The next best thing with like an already like effect or a death rattle on it is Kalagos to reduce the cost of another spell, and you're getting 16 stats on it. The dragon pool is seriously not that good right now. There are a lot of weak dragons in the game. And actually, I got to the point, like, beyond that, Runaway Blackwing might be, like, the third best thing you can get, because you get 9/9 stat line, and it does something to an opposing minion, assuming your opponent has minions. So, I really, really think that the dragon pool is just not good enough right now. For every time you hit, you know, a Briarspawn Drake, you're going to hit, like, an Adaptive Amalgam, or an equivalent of Adaptive Amalgam, 2 or 3 times. Like, bearing in mind, so, like, Fairy Dragon, I think, is still in the game. There is a bunch of dragons where it's like, you know, play this dragon while holding a dragon, give both dragons +1/+1. That's not good with your Yasundare either. So, yeah, I'm not convinced. I really should have put together another graphic that said, you know, this is the average attack and average health you get from a dragon. From my just looking at things and gut feeling it, I suspect the average dragon is about a 4/4 stat line, there or thereabouts. Maybe a bit more healthy than that. Maybe like 4/6, so 7 mana, getting 12/11 stats, and some of it's slow. Is that a good deal? Not particularly, I think, for modern day standard. Then the big issue, and we've kind of already like gone over this before, of both this and Totola being taunt minions that you might pull back with Hydration Station over and over and over again. And that is simply, they're not as good as other taunt minions in the game. Why would you play either of these over Ziliax, which is going to kill whatever it faces? It's going to give you lifesteal and is really annoying to deal with. Just frankly, a big fuck you of a minion. It's like, you know, everyone was shitting the bed at the Paladin card, which was like Divine Shields take 3 hits to break. Ziliax takes 4 hits to break, and he's got elusive as well, so he's really, really, really toxic as a card. And also, why don't you just use Jim and his endless fucking army of taunt starships? A lot of those as well in the warrior package can get Killer Guy on the package, assuming you use the Yamato starship piece as well. And I'm telling you right now, a big starship from Jim Raynor is better than Totola or Yasundare. So I just don't see either of these cards usurping the current starship warrior package out there, which is performing okay right now. So yeah, it's simply that. And also just bearing in mind that these have a mech synergy as well, and there are mech cards that can resurrect mechs. So Totola and Yasundare don't have that additional layer of resurrection, so yeah, I just don't see either of these seeing play. I think they just lose the mirror to the mech hydration station version of that deck. I did promise though there are other ways to get Yasundare popping. Succumb to Madness, a 3-mana warrior spell. Discover a friendly dragon that died this game, resummon it. It's a revived pet for warrior, and the pet is a dragon, not a beast. Revived pet saw a bit of play in various hunter decks. I think it did actually see play in the Death Rattle package as well to get your Death Rattles back, to then copy the Death Rattles or duplicate the Death Rattles, which is one of the issues of warrior. They can't do that, so, you know, fuck you, warrior, basically. Obviously, the big one here is you could use Yasundare, you pull it back with Succumb to Madness, and it gives you another trigger of Yasundare over the course of the game. Now, assuming you're running more than, you know, just one dragon in your deck, which is probably a good idea since a lot of the dragons require you to be holding dragons, there are going to be chances, or situations where you're going to miss Yasundare, and you are going to succumb to Madness. That's why this card is named Succumb to Madness. Because for every time you hit Yasundare and get the combo going, you know, 1 turn longer, you're going to hit some of the smaller dragons instead that are in your hand simply to, you know, get you to Yasundare. So I'm not sure about it. I don't see this full package popping. That being said, if you do hit an Afflicted Devastator, I actually think this card is pretty solid. 4 mana 6/6 that deals 3 damage to all of the friendly minions, and then does 3 to all enemy minions. 4 mana 6/6 is obviously a really good stat line. If you play it on its own right, and I think this Warrior Dragon deck isn't going to play too many minions. It's going to be a lot of like individual big boys until you get Yasondare going. I think there's a decent chance that the battle cry is actually not a big downside, and if anything, it's going to be an upside because it's going to proc your own X. One final thing I'm just going to mention before, I end this, because we've now seen all of the cards. Do you remember back at the beginning, the 3 cards I said for Warrior? Warrior is meant to have a Dark Gift package, and the dragon... Oh, sorry, the Dark Rider, which was requiring you to hold dragons, is actually a demon. Conveniently for the, the dragon deck. Is the Dark Gift package. That is it. Dark Rider is the Dark Gift package for Warrior, which seems so weird. I guess it's kind of like the Lackey package, where the lackeys for some of the decks will really just like, here's a bunch of lackeys. Lackeys are good cards, so it means the deck is going to be good, right? I do appreciate a Dark Gift is probably about a 2 mana effect-ish, so it's actually a pretty good deal, but there's no like intrinsic synergy beyond what the Dark Gift is in this package. And also, I would like to say that the Lackey package in most of the classes, I think, had more than 1 class card in them, whereas Warrior just only has Dark Rider and then the neutrals, right? So let me be fair here. These are the Dark Gifts, in case you forgot them, the 10 options of them. There's +3 attack and lifesteal, +2/+2 and elusive. Costs 2 less but has -2 attack. Only offered to minions that couldn't go below 1 attack. Charge. If you play it, you get a 2/2 copy of it. Battle Cry triggers twice, but again, only works in Battle Cries. 4 health and Taunt Reborn. And Reborn with full health and enchantments. +4/+5. Put it on top of your deck. And then Divine Shield, Wind Fury. So these are your Dark Gifts. And here are your 3 Dark Gift enablers. And I think the whole point of this, and why like Yasondare is meant to work, is that your Nightmare Lord Xavius could hit Yasondare. It could then make it summon itself with a 2/2 copy, which obviously would be a really good deal, or give it Reborn. Both of them are a good deal, so you've got like a 1 in 5 chance of hitting either of those things. Now, it does require you to have 3 or fewer minions in the deck to make sure you hit Yasondare. Are you going to do that in your dragon deck, assuming you want to play all the cards that say, if you're holding a dragon? No, that's not enough dragon, so you're going to have to put some other cards in the deck. Then beyond that, you have Treacherous Tormentor, which is discover a legendary minion with a Dark Gift. You might hit the dragon, you might not. Odds are you don't hit the dragon, so... Is that good enough to see play in your Dark Gift deck without any other Dark Gift synergy? I don't think so. Creature of Madness discover a 3-cost minion. It could be a dragon. You never know. There's a decent chance, though, it's not going to be a dragon. There are a few 3-cost dragons in the game, but again, does it even really matter? Because it's not a dragon that's going into your hand. Oh, no, I guess it is going into your hand first. I take it back. You could discover a dragon. I think there's more of a chance you get a discovered dragon from Creature of Madness than there is a legendary minion from Treacherous Tormentor, but we'll have to see. Maybe all the classes get a legendary dragon at some point. Spoilers, they're not, I don't think. And maybe then you get more chance of getting a legendary dragon, but I just don't see all of this. I just don't see where the synergy is with the Dark Gift package versus, like, the Imbue package even. I guess one small thing is the Clutch of Corruption does say that it gets a copy of the minion, and I think this would copy the Dark Gift as well. So if you got a Dark Gift on your Yasondare, which was like Reborn, and you Clutch of Corruption it, that is actually seriously scary at that point. If you don't bounce that card or silence it, you're going to be in for a bad time, because that is going to summon a bunch of dragons from it. It's basically when it dies, it's going to just be fill your board with minions. But again, hand wavy, you might be averaging like 4 or 5 stat line on all of these minions, so it might not be as big a deal as you think it's going to be. So I've actually got a few things with the issues, by the way, with the gimmicks of this set as well. I was actually wondering, and I think it's been answered now, what would happen if you imbue in a class that doesn't have an imbue mechanic, and I believe it just fizzles. However, Dark Gifts work in classes that don't have Dark Gifts, which I think is really unfair. Like, it feels like the Dark Gift side of the things have got a bit of a raw deal about it. Also, if the Dark Gifts are literally just going to be like Lackey-esque without any other synergy associated with it, I'm not entirely certain if they're strong enough on their own merit to see play, but we'll see. I feel like a lot of these cards are, discover a card. It's unlikely to be as good as a card you'd put in your deck anyway. Putting the Dark Gift on it probably takes it about the average quality of a card you put in your deck. At which point, why wouldn't you not just put a card in your deck anyway and not have to deal with this randomness? So, yeah, I'm not sure right now, but again, we've only seen 2 of the classes so far. Anyway, that'll do it for this reveal. I should have looked down who it is tomorrow. I think it's paladin and someone, but I can't quite remember now, so we'll be surprised together who the reveals are. Again, I'll probably do about 2 classes per episode, so if it's only 1 class revealed tomorrow, I'll do the next video on the day afterwards. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!